So it's a big deal Warhammer 40K rules preview today. We've got the stats for Primarch Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels. Let's see what this guy can do in game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're reviewing some preview rules for the Primarch of the Dark Angels. Always pretty exciting when you get some new stats updated for a Primarch in 40k. It looks like this preview might well have been prompted by that leak of the Lion's Guard miniatures last night. Despite how much they managed to leak things, Games Workshop try to like to keep Warhammer community as the first place to go for with news, so they often follow up leaks like this with their own community articles, and that works out pretty nicely for us as we get some more information. In the preview, we've got his stat line, defensive and offensive stats, plus some abilities. One of the interesting things, though, that they did confirm was that they confirmed that you will be able to get him in this Lion Guard box set. A lot of people were just a little bit underwhelmed by that. Obviously, he's an awesome and pretty cool model himself, for the most part being very, very well received by the fan base. I personally think that they've done very nicely with him, and that's a pretty spectacular paint job as well. The slightly underwhelming bit, though, is that he is indeed just packaged with standard Blade Guard veterans, and don't get me wrong, they're very nice models in their own right, I think, but it's just so weird to have a Primarch package alongside some generic Primaris, when all they had to do was give them a fancy Dark Angels upgrade sprue, and people would have been over the moon, even if they weren't going to stretch to doing something cool like sculpting some specific Deathwing Terminators to guard him, which I think also would have been very, very fun. In any case, looks like no extra bits or anything like that. The box set comes with a couple of bits of art as well, including him fighting Angron. It does feel a little bit like just jumping on a Primarch release to push a few models that people might not necessarily be buying in droves, even if I'm sure they will be useful to quite a few collectors out there. As I mentioned last night, Lionel Johnson will also be featuring for the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway next month. Feel free to stick around to the end of the video if you want to hear about how to enter for that. Getting back to the main event though, the big news today is that Games Workshop has revealed a fair bunch of Lionel Johnson's stats. It is kind of interesting though that they seem to have previewed a bunch of stats but not actually published the datasheet yet. I guess they might well be holding that back until actually nearer the time when his book and his model release to get people hyped on that same week. It'll almost certainly be a digital datasheet download when the Lion book comes out, similar to how we've got for Azrael and Vashtor, and pretty handy rather than bundling it into that Lion Arcs of Omen book, as it means that to get a single datasheet you don't have to pay £30+. In this preview though, they really have shown us off just about all the important stuff. We've got his stat line, sword stats, Emperor's Shield, and one of his special rules, though I guess at this point the rules might be kind of short-lived with 10th edition just around the corner. First up, here we have his stat line. Overall it is pretty similar to Guilliman, as you might have expected. The models are roughly the same size, and I feel like the character differences that he was going to get would be the things that would set him apart from Guilliman, as opposed to being radically different on his base stats. Compared with Guilliman, he's got the same movement of 8, he hits on 2s as you'd expect, strength and toughness 6 for a big bad Primarch towering over his fellow Marines. He's got 9 wounds, so you will be able to hide him behind your forces, and the enemy can't just directly gun him straight off the table. And as expected, a 2+ save, augmented with the extra defensive abilities of the Emperor's Shield, which we'll get onto. There are 2 ways that he's going to diverge from Guilliman though. Rather than having a measly 6 attacks, he is all the way up to 10. Kind of as anticipated really, he is going to be a lot more of a melee combat Primarch as opposed to a raw general. Unless they change anything big for Space Marines in the meantime, which I think is unlikely, he should also get Shock Assault as well to go up to 11. It's a pretty excessive number for a Loyalist and is going to be a spectacularly dangerous swordsman, particularly with the fealty stats that we've seen as well. The other thing, just to rub it in for Guilliman, is that he's got a base leadership 11, not 10. The Ultramarines do get a bonus one with their chapter tactic, I believe, though, so it is still kind of level. And I feel like this might be more partly due to Guilliman not having received a 9th edition datasheet at any point throughout the release, so arguably his stats might be a little bit behind current sensibilities. Otherwise, in terms of raw stats and how the model's going to function, one of the biggest questions is whether or not he gets the monster keyword like Guilliman, or infantry like other big bad characters that have been released in 9th edition, such as Abaddon the Despoiler. My guess would be that if Games Workshop redid Guilliman's datasheet, they'd probably make him an infantry rather than a monster. It does maybe feel a little bit unfortunate for him to have that tagline. It makes him quite a lot worse around terrain and things, though admittedly just looking at the models you can see how they might well struggle to fit through doorways and things like that. I guess there are downsides to being a demigod. I'd say whether or not he gets the infantry keyword will be quite helpful for him, but perhaps even more so in Dark Angels, as he's almost certainly going to get the Inner Circle keyword. If he does, then as an infantry character, you'd only be able to wound him on a 4+, and that will be a rather nice durability increase. Then we've got his combat stats. Fealty is his sword, and as is the trend for many of the most dangerous combatants in Warhammer 40k, it's both got a sweep and strike mode, so he can choose to be a bit more of a blender when he's fighting against hordes, something that Guilliman lacks at the moment. The sweep mode will double your attacks, and he'll be making those at strength 6, AP -3, and a flat damage of 2. That's going to be pretty spectacular, all up to a crazy 22 attacks. Hordes are definitely not going to get in this guy's way too well. And then if he needs to bring down heavier targets, he goes up to strength 10, AP -5, and damage 4 with the strike mode. All the better to bring down those enormous threats and monsters, as is kind of fitting with his lore. For a rough estimate of his damage output, these are the sort of numbers that it looks like you'd be able to expect out of him. For this, I've assumed that he's going to be able to have one of those Chapter Master style reroll buffs, where he can make himself reroll all hits if he wants to. All the other Primarchs have that, so it doesn't really make too much sense that he wouldn't get this. Usually you can target one core or character unit, and as the Primarchs themselves are a character unit, you can usually use it on them if they want to focus on their own combat prowess. In any case, he looks like he's going to reap a pretty brutal tally in just about anything that he goes up to in combat. He kills 18 guardsmen on average, 12 Space Marines in power armor, which are particularly nice with that sweep mode, 6 dead Terminators, which is pretty potent with the strike, a crazy 28 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, so just about any one of those is dead if it doesn't have an invul save, and then 14 wounds to a toughness 8 vehicle with a 5+ invul and -1 damage. That means he should be on average likely to one round something like a Plague Burst Crawler that's very tough indeed. Overall, as expected, pretty brutal no matter what he's going to be fighting. Far better than Guilliman in one-on-one combat punch. We might have to do a bit of a comparison to the Primarch of the Ultramarines when we actually get his full datasheet and stats. On the defensive, I was kind of interested to see what the Emperor's Shield will be doing. It's kind of cool when a Primarch actually picks up a bit of war gear that the Emperor had, and you'd expect this to be a pretty god tier relic. If anything though, I'd say that the rules for this maybe aren't quite as exciting as I would have expected. It gives you a 4+ invul save, which isn't really anything to massively shout about in Warhammer 40k. Things like the Demon Primarchs just get that at base. And then beyond that, the only other special rule that it gets is that each time a saving throw is made for this model in combat, you can reflect a mortal wound on a 6, and that only adds up to 3 mortal wounds per phase. It's definitely not unhelpful, though in some cases it just might not be all that relevant if he's fighting against something that he's easily going to kill in combat anyway. Unless we're missing any other special rules though, it really does look like Guilliman's Armour of Fate is pretty superior on the defensive perspective. A 3+ invul save is absolutely awesome, and that one also has the ability to give him a chance to resurrect from death when he's slain as well, which again is a really big deal. I guess this one might not add up to be too bad if he does indeed get infantry and inner circle. Only being wounded on a 4+ will be a nice advantage over Guilliman, but overall I still suspect it's going to be easier to kill Lionel Johnson of the Dark Angels as opposed to Rebute Guilliman of the Ultramarines. I guess one question I was a bit unsure about was whether or not he'd get something like a damage cap, similar to Ghazghkull or Abaddon the Despoiler, or say the Catan Shards of the Necrons. I have a feeling that if he did have an ability like this, it'd probably be on the Emperor's Shield section of the datasheet, so I'm going to guess that he doesn't have that. After all, I suppose Rebute doesn't himself. I feel like these damage cap mechanics are probably not the best thing to proliferate throughout Warhammer 40k in general. It is a bit weird when you could focus an entire army's guns on a model right out in the open and they just survive it cause reasons, but still it does mean that if he's going to be fighting any of the foes that do have that, like say a Catan or Abaddon, then he's going to be at a bit of a disadvantage, able to be killed in a single turn, where he's got no chance of killing his foe. Finally, for the big rules previews, we've also got a special rule. This one's called Forestwalk, and apparently this one harkens back to his time growing up on Caliban. He did spend a lot of time out in the jungle or on his own surviving the beasties after all. This allows Lionel Johnson to choose to set up in Deep Strike if he wants to, setting your model up on the shadowed paths instead of setting it up on the battlefield. If you do, then during the reinforcement step of one of your movement phases, you can set up this model anywhere on the battlefield that's greater than 9 inches away from enemy models, basically normal Deep Strike Reserve type rules, and there's no mention of any special rule for this, so I guess that would still be turn 2 or turn 3, you're not going to have him jumping on the enemy turn 1. If you do choose to do this, he gets to reroll charges if he does come in like this, and I guess that does up the chance of him actually being able to connect with the enemy. but still I must admit this does seem like a bit of a questionable move in my point of view. And I feel like most people will probably want to start him on the board and get him on the table straight away, particularly if he has the infantry keyword and he's got flexibility around terrain. If you don't start him on the board turn 1, then he can't threaten any counter charges right from the get-go. Plus you wouldn't be able to use any of his command abilities. I suspect he'll have some chapter master style rerolls that you could throw on a ranged unit turn 1 before getting stuck into melee turn 2 or something. And again, that's kind of losing value compared with keeping him in reserve. Probably the biggest reason not to, though, is just how unreliable that charge is going to be unless you invest in extra support. Unless he has other rules on his datasheet that we don't know about, that would just be a 9-inch charge, so it's around about a 50% chance to either succeed or fail unless he's got any other way of getting a boost to that. That includes the reroll, so it just means that you're giving yourself a coin flip chance of just being standing out in the open, ready for the opponent to presumably try and gun down your very expensive model next turn. For the most part, I think it's going to make more sense to have this guy in the midst of your army, commanding the troops and then doing a countercharge. I guess if you really did want to make the most use of this, you could perhaps combo it with an on-the-board chaplain to give a +2 to charge range litany. Maybe have a Ravenwing chaplain zoom up the board with that litany active, then have him deep strike into the aura range so he's got a 7-inch charge rather than a 9, and with a reroll that's actually fairly reliable, though still not 100% guaranteed. If you did want to use this ability though, then that's probably how I'd do it. That'd actually give him a good chance to reach combat, rather than having a 50-50 chance of falling short. Looks like we're going to be waiting on his full datasheet, at least for a little bit though. We've still got a bunch of basic questions that the datasheet will answer. First up is points cost, where I'd guess he's going to be around about 300 to 350 maybe. Gilliman's 300 at the moment. I'm guessing this guy's going to have a little bit less on the command ability side of things, and a bit more in terms of the melee, which we've already seen. He might still have other special rules to surprise us with, other command abilities, or maybe some other fun things from the lore, though it does seem that if Vashtor's datasheet is anything to go by, I wouldn't expect too much on this front. Games Workshop do seem to be trying to make their datasheets a bit less bloated. We don't know his Warlord trait either. That could be another source of doing something interesting or useful. I'd guess it'd be one of the Dark Angel's standard ones, and I also guess that he'd have to be your nominal named Warlord if he is on the battlefield. That seems to be the way with Primarch level characters, like Angron hogging the Warlord trait for the World Eaters. Seems at least fairly likely he might get Supreme Commander in a similar way to Rabute Gilliman. I'd say it's a little bit less certain though. He doesn't have the lore of being Lord Commander of the Imperium, so maybe he will just be fighting alongside his Dark Angels and not trying to steal Rabute's limelight. Finally, I kind of wonder whether that Lion's Guard formation will get any special rule, or if they were just going to be a complete afterthought and just a unit that Games Workshop's packaging with this guy to sell more models. In any case, I'm sure a fair few people will be looking forward to the release of this guy. I'm going to guess that the Blade Guard veteran inclusion will make him notably more expensive than if he was on his own. Here are the current prices for Gilliman and Blade Guard. If we just smash those two together, then he'd likely be in the region of around £80, €100, or $130. It could be a little bit more than this if Games Workshop are trying to really charge a premium for the Lion, or it could be a little bit less if they're seeing this as a mini discount bundle and giving us some discounted Blade Guard as a sorry for bundling them with the model in the first place. I guess it's going to be coming out within the month, could be very soon, could be a little bit later. The Arcs of Omen books have been releasing around about every 2 to 4 weeks, so hopefully she'll be at least fairly soon. Let me know what you make of his rules though. Would you be tempted to put him on the table? And how do you think that he stacks up to Gilliman if he's more of a combat beast and perhaps a little bit easier to kill and a bit less on the big command rerolls and things? Finally, while we seem to be on the subject of Lionel Johnson once more, I thought I'd just quickly mention the channel giveaway for May once more, where the monthly giveaway is going to be for 6 copies of Lionel Johnson and his attendant-friendly Blade Guard veterans. There's going to be 6 copies of these up for grabs, and as always with the monthly channel giveaways, there's 2 different equal ways to enter. Either support the channel on Patreon for any amount and help me keep on making these videos quite as regularly as I am. That gets you automatic entry into the giveaways every month. Otherwise, you can also enter free by supporting the channel on social media, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the Facebook page that's linked down in the video description, and then to actually enter the draw, check back to the Facebook page on the 1st of May, a giveaway post appears, and simply respond to that giveaway post with a photo of any 40k miniature with your name and the date handwritten within the same photo. The last bit's just to ward off against Facebook bots and spammers and ensure that the prizes go to real hobbyists out there. Then when all of the entries are in, I put the Facebook and the Patreon entries all together. and I do the draw with a random number generator, announcing the results on a channel update video around the 4th of the month. I do try and keep these regular prize giveaways coming, as they're pretty good for building a buzz around the channel. And at the moment we've still got the April one to come, which will be going live on the 1st on the Facebook page. That one's going to be for 4 copies of the big Vash Tour box with him versus the Dark Angels, so feel free to check in for that one too. Games Workshop do seem to be keeping the big character and box sets coming these days. In any case, check down in the video description if you'd like to support this channel on Patreon and keep all the videos coming, or if you'd like to check out the Facebook page and find the place to enter for free. Really quite big news though. Let me know your thoughts on the stat line for yet another Primarch entering the realms of Warhammer 40k. Overall, I'd say that the stats look like he's probably in a good place to be decently strong in game, though I feel like with most things that are more dedicated melee monsters, he does need to be absolutely brutal and really quite efficient if he is going to be earning his place in lists against all of the good things that Dark Angels can field right now. In any case, look forward to catching up with you guys in future videos, so I hope to see you guys next time.